Hi guys. Today I'm going to tell you a story that isn't just a story, but a secret. A secret that has been hidden for centuries, whispered only among those who dared to dream beyond the limits of ordinary life. Our topic is the alchemists and their secrets. Now, when you hear the word alchemist, maybe you imagine old men with long beards, sitting in dusty rooms, surrounded by bottles, flasks, and glowing liquids. You might think about the tales of people who tried to turn lead into gold, or those who searched endlessly for the elixir of life, that mythical potion that could make a person live forever. But here's the truth. The story of alchemy is much deeper, much stranger, and much more dangerous than you've ever heard before. So, let me ask you this. What would you do if you had the power to turn ordinary dirt into gold? What if you could drink a potion and never grow old? Would you use it for yourself? Would you share it with the world? Or would you hide it because you knew that once the secret got out, humanity might destroy itself? This is where the story begins. And trust me, guys, once you step into the world of alchemy, you'll realize it's not just about science. It's about power, greed, hope, fear, and the deepest mysteries of the human soul. So, dim the lights, clear your mind, and get ready, because I'm about to take you into a journey where fact and myth blend into one. Now, centuries ago, in the dimly lit streets of ancient Egypt, a man named Zosimos sat by the flickering light of an oil lamp. He was one of the earliest known alchemists. His room smelled of burning herbs and melted metals. On his table lay scrolls covered with strange drawing circles within circles, symbols of snakes eating their own tails, suns, moons, and stars. These were not just decorations, they were maps to secrets hidden in nature itself. Zosimos believed that everything in the universe was alive, even metals. He wrote that metals had spirits inside them, and just as humans could grow, learn, and transform, metals too could evolve. Lead, he thought, was like a child unformed, unfinished. Gold, on the other hand, was like perfection. If you could guide the spirit of lead to maturity, it would eventually become gold. That was the heart of alchemy, transformation. But here's where it gets interesting. Zosimos didn't just mean transformation of metals. He meant transformation of the soul. He said that just as you try to purify a metal, you must purify yourself. You must burn away your weaknesses, melt down your fears, and reshape yourself into something higher, something stronger. For Zosimos, alchemy wasn't only about gold, it was about becoming gold inside. And this idea didn't stay in Egypt. It spread through the sands of time. It traveled into Greece, into Arabia, into Europe. Everywhere it went, it changed, adapted, and grew. Alchemy became a language of symbols, secrets, and mysteries. Imagine this: in the dark ages of Europe, when most people were afraid of witches, demons, and the unknown, there were secret rooms hidden behind libraries, monasteries, and castles. In these rooms, strange experiments were taking place. Men and women with sharp eyes and steady hands were mixing powders, boiling liquids, and drawing stars on the floor. To outsiders, it looked like madness, but to them, it was a holy mission. They believed they were touching the very fabric of creation, and yet, alchemy was dangerous. Many who tried lost their lives. Explosions tore apart small laboratories. Poisons claimed the lives of those who inhaled the wrong fumes. But still, they continued. Why? Because the prize was too great. Now, Let's pause for a second. Think about it. If you knew there was even a 1% chance of finding a potion that could give you eternal youth, would you risk your life? Most people would say yes. And that alchemy never died, survived, because it fed the most powerful desire humans have, the desire to conquer death. But here's the twist. The more you read about alchemists, the more you realize something strange. Their books are not straightforward. They are full of puzzles. They talk about dragons, about marriages between the sun and the moon, about fountains of milk and blood. Why? Because they didn't want outsiders to understand. Their secrets were too dangerous to be written plainly. Only those with patience, intelligence, and spiritual purity could decode them. One of the most famous symbols of alchemy is the Philosopher's Stone. You've probably heard of it, said to be the substance that could turn any metal into gold and grant immortality. But was it ever real, or was it just a metaphor? Some historians believe the Philosopher's Stone wasn't a physical object at all, but a symbol of enlightenment. To create the stone meant to transform yourself, to discover the divine within you. Others, however, believe that yes, some alchemists may have actually come very close to creating something extraordinary. Take the story of Nicolas Flamel, a Frenchman from the 14th century. According to legend, he discovered the secret of the Philosopher's Stone after decoding a mysterious book. People said he became incredibly wealthy, and that he and his wife never seemed to age. When he died, his tomb was opened, but it was found empty. Did he fake his death? Did he discover the secret of eternal life? To this day, nobody knows for sure. But guys, think about how powerful this legend is. The idea that one man, through study and persistence, could break the laws of nature. It's no wonder people still talk about Flamel, even hundreds of years later. He even appears in modern books and movies. That's how strong the myth of alchemy is. Yet, beneath the myth, there is something very real. You see, while most alchemists never turned lead into gold, their experiments led to the birth of modern chemistry. They discovered acids, invented distillation, and created medicines. They laid the foundation for the science we use today. In other words, the dream of alchemy may have been impossible, but the journey gave us knowledge that changed the world. And here's where the story gets darker. Because knowledge is power, and power attracts those who are willing to do anything to have it. In medieval Europe, the church was suspicious of alchemists. Some were accused of witchcraft and burned alive. Others were hired secretly by kings and emperors who wanted gold to fund their wars. Imagine the pressure. Create gold or face death. Some alchemists, like Paracelsus, became legends not just for their experiments, but for their strange personalities. Paracelsus traveled from town to town, carrying a sword filled with secret medicines. He fought with doctors, cursed his enemies, and declared that he could cure any disease. Was he a genius, a madman, or both? History still debates it, but let me tell you something chilling. Many alchemists wrote about visions, dreams where angels, demons, or mysterious figures appeared to them, giving them clues. Were these just hallucinations caused by fumes and chemicals, or did they really touch something beyond our world? Some claimed that alchemy wasn't just human knowledge, was divine knowledge, whispered to mankind by higher beings. Think about that for a second. If true, then the secrets of alchemy aren't human inventions. They are gifts or maybe traps from something far older and far stranger than us. The night was heavy with silence, and within the stone walls of a hidden monastery, a man bent over his desk, scribbling furiously with a quill. His name was Arnaldus of Villanova, and he was one of the figures whispered about in both fear and admiration. He believed that alchemy was not simply a quest for gold, but a divine path to truth. Yet the church had already placed him under suspicion. In every candlelit corner, Arnaldus felt the weight of eyes watching him, unseen but present, ready to condemn him the moment he slipped. He knew what had happened to others. Some had been dragged into dark prisons. Some had been burned alive, accused of sorcery. Still, he wrote, pouring every hidden fragment of knowledge onto his pages, knowing that if his work survived, someone in the future might continue where he left off. He was convinced that the metals spoke in their own secret language, and only those who purified their souls could hear them. The flame, he said, was not just heat, but a living being, a voice of nature that revealed itself to the patient and the fearless. He believed that each chemical transformation mirrored a spiritual one. Calcination was the burning of pride. Dissolution was the washing away of desires. Coagulation was the birth of something stronger. In his writings, he described visions of angels guiding him through stages of the great work, showing him images that no one else could see. Were these hallucinations or divine revelations? He never questioned. To him, they were truth, but not everyone sought purity. In a castle far from Arnaldus's cloistered world, another man practiced alchemy with a different purpose. His name was Raymond Lull, and while history remembers him as a philosopher and mystic, stories tell of his darker experiments. It is said that he discovered a formula to transmute metals into gold, and that kings begged him for his services. Rumors spread that he had created immense wealth for the French crown, enough to fund armies and wars. Whether this was true or not, one thing is certain: alchemists who showed even a hint of success became targets of power. They were hunted, used, and discarded once their secrets were drained. Imagine the pressure of being in their shoes. Imagine knowing something that could change the balance of kingdoms, but also put your own head on the chopping block. Every knock at the door could be a friend or an inquisitor. Every candle flicker in the night could mean the shadows had shifted and danger had entered your chamber. That was the reality of alchemy in Europe's darkest centuries. And yet, despite fear, despite death, the knowledge spread, not openly, but like fire traveling through hidden veins beneath the earth. Manuscripts were copied by hand, disguised as religious texts, their secrets locked within symbols that only initiates could understand. The Ouroboros, the serpent eating its own tail, was drawn not as art, but as a riddle. The marriage of the sun and moon was not a tale of romance, but a secret about balancing forces within the laboratory and within the soul. Every line, every symbol, every strange phrase was a door, and only those with patience and courage could unlock it. Centuries passed, and the Renaissance dawned. Europe awakened from its long sleep, and curiosity burned brighter than fear. In this age, alchemy took on new faces. Men like Marsilio Ficino and Giovanni Pico della Mirandola studied ancient texts, weaving alchemy with philosophy, astrology, and magic. They believed that humanity was not chained to its limits, that man could rise to become something divine. Alchemy, for them, was not simply science, it was salvation. And then came Paracelsus. He strode into history like a storm, carrying with him both wisdom and chaos. Unlike the careful scholars before him, Paracelsus was brash, bold, and unafraid of confrontation. He burned the textbooks of other doctors, declaring them useless. He walked into towns with a sword at his side, claiming it contained secret medicines. He healed the sick with remedies no one else understood, then cursed those who doubted him. To the common people, he was a miracle worker. To his enemies, he was a dangerous lunatic. But one thing is undeniable: he redefined alchemy. For Paracelsus, the great work was not about turning lead into gold. It was about healing. He believed that every disease had a cure hidden in nature, and that alchemy was the art of finding it. He mixed herbs, minerals, and strange concoctions, pushing the boundaries of medicine. Some of his cures worked, others killed. But his vision reshaped the very idea of what alchemy could be. He gave it purpose, not just mystery. And yet, the hunger for gold never disappeared. In courts across Europe, kings and nobles kept alchemists in their service, promising riches if they succeeded, threatening punishment if they failed. Some alchemists pretended, creating illusions of gold by clever tricks, coating metals to fool their patrons. These men often met gruesome ends when their lies were uncovered. Others truly believed they were close, spending years in smoky rooms, sacrificing health, wealth, and sanity to reach the impossible. One story tells of an alchemist in Prague working under the great emperor Rudolf II. Rudolf was obsessed with the occult. He filled his palace with astrologers, magicians, and alchemists, desperate to uncover secrets that could grant him power. In his laboratories, strange lights glowed at night, and whispers echoed through the halls. Some claimed that homunculate tiny artificial humans were being created in glass vessels, fed by drops of blood and mysterious substances. Were they real, or were they fevered fantasies born of obsession? We may never know. But the stories linger, and in them lies a kernel of truth. Alchemy was never just about gold. It was about the dream of creation itself. Think about that. To create life where there was none. To shape existence as if you were a god. That is the ultimate temptation, and perhaps the ultimate danger. Meanwhile, far from royal courts, secret brotherhoods formed. Groups like the Rosicrucians emerged, cloaked in mystery, claiming to hold hidden wisdom passed down from ancient times. Their manifestos spoke of enlightenment, of transforming not just metals but humanity itself. To the public, they were invisible. To those who knew, they were both hope and threat. Their symbols were filled with alchemical meaning, their promises laced with visions of a new age. Some believed they truly possessed the secrets of the philosopher's stone. Others believed they were merely seekers, using myth as a mask. And then there was Nicholas Flamel, whose legend grew larger with every telling. The story said that he had found a book written in strange symbols, and after years of study, he unlocked its meaning. He performed the great work, created the stone, and with it, wealth beyond imagination. His neighbors swore he never aged, that he and his wife remained as young as ever, while others withered. When his tomb was opened, centuries later, it was empty. Did he truly succeed? Or was it all a myth crafted by those who longed to believe? No one can say. But even now, his name is spoken as if he might still be walking among us. This is the power of alchemy. It blurs the line between truth and legend, between history and dream. Its practitioners lived in both worlds, half scientists, half mystics, their lives tangled in secrecy and danger. They were accused of madness, and sometimes they were. They were accused of lies, and sometimes they lied. But always, beneath the smoke and the fear, there was the burning flame of desire, the desire to transform, to transcend, to touch the eternal. And perhaps the greatest secret of all is this: even if they never turned lead into gold. Even if the philosopher's stone never existed, the alchemists changed the world. Their experiments laid the groundwork for chemistry, for medicine, for the sciences that shape our lives today. But more than that, they left behind a vision that humans are not bound by what they are, that we can always strive to become more, that within every piece of lead, no matter how dull, there is a spark of gold waiting to be revealed. So the question remains, were the alchemists fools, or were they prophets? Did they waste their lives chasing illusions, or did they glimpse something real, something too powerful and dangerous to be shared with the world? Their books still exist, filled with riddles and symbols. Their laboratories lie in ruins, yet their legends endure. Perhaps the secret is still out there, hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone bold enough to see what others cannot. And if that someone were you, would you dare to look? The streets of Prague glistened with rain as the moonlight slid across the cobblestones. Inside the towering castle of Emperor Rudolph II, shadows moved across vaulted ceilings and whispers carried through hidden corridors. Rudolph's court was infamous, a gathering place for the strangest and most brilliant minds of Europe, astronomers who charted forbidden stars, physicians who dissected corpses by candlelight, mystics who swore they could speak with angels, and among them were the alchemists, their chambers filled with the scent of sulfur and quicksilver, their walls blackened by smoke from endless experiments. The emperor was obsessed. He believed the philosopher's stone could be found within his lifetime, and that it would give him both the eternal life he craved and the endless wealth his empire demanded. Gold was not just a symbol of power, it was the very lifeblood of war, and Europe at that time was a battlefield of ambition. Rudolph's obsession was so complete that he neglected politics and let his empire decay while he poured his fortune into the pursuit of alchemy. Among his alchemists was a mysterious figure known only as Edward Kelly. His arrival was as sudden as it was strange. He claimed to possess knowledge beyond the reach of ordinary men, and he brought with him secrets of communication with angels, using a crystal ball and strange, coded languages. Kelly promised the emperor that not only could he create the philosopher's stone, but he could summon the very voices of heaven to guide him. He worked alongside the scholar John Dee, a man of deep intellect and mystical pursuits. Together, they formed a partnership, Kelly with his visions, Dee with his calculations, and Rudolph with his insatiable desire. But partnerships in alchemy rarely ended in harmony. Kelly grew ambitious, whispering to the emperor that he alone could create the stone. Tensions rose, accusations flew, and eventually Kelly found himself locked in a tower cell. Yet, even there, legends say he continued to experiment, scrawling symbols on the cold stone walls, speaking to unseen entities in the dead of night. Some say he succeeded in part, that he created powders that could turn small bits of metal into gold. Others claim it was deception, a clever trick of coding or substitution. Whatever the truth, Kelly died with his secrets unproven, leaving Rudolph with nothing but ruins of hope. Still, the emperor's obsession fueled a greater fire across Europe. Everywhere, men and women searched for the ultimate key. In Paris, whispers of Nicolas Flamel's book grew louder. In Germany, the Rosicrucian manifestos appeared, promising hidden wisdom to those who sought enlightenment. In England, secret societies formed, claiming ancient knowledge passed through veils of time. The dream of the stone refused to die. And yet, beneath the surface, a different current was flowing. More and more alchemists began to see that the great work was not literal but symbolic. They spoke of the stone not as a substance but as a state of being. Gold was purity of the soul. The elixir of life was the discovery of truth. Transmutation was the transformation of the human spirit. To achieve the work was to rise above the corruption of flesh and desire, to become something greater, to awaken the divine spark within. But even these seekers cloaked their writings in riddles, fearful of persecution. Their books spoke of dragons devouring themselves, of kings uniting with queens, of death and rebirth in fire. Each symbol held layers of meaning, some chemical, some spiritual, some mystical. To the outsider, it was madness. To the initiate, it was revelation. One such initiate was Heinrich Kunrath, whose book Amphitheatrum Sapientia Aeternae combined alchemy with Christian mysticism. His famous engraving shows a circular laboratory, half science and half temple, with the words ora, et labora, pray and work written above. For Kunrath, the alchemist's task was both physical and spiritual. To distill a liquid was to distill the soul. To purify a metal was to purify the heart. His work reminded those who dared to read it that the laboratory and the chapel were reflections of one another, two halves of the same quest. But others took darker paths. Legends tell of Basil Valentine, a monk who wrote of the powers of antimony, a substance both poisonous and curative. His writings hinted at rituals that blurred the line between experiment and sorcery. He claimed visions of ravens carrying keys of fire, of lions devouring serpents, of kings drowning in their own blood. Were these allegories for chemical processes, or the fever dreams of a man who had seen too much? To this day, no one can say for certain. And as the centuries rolled on, the divide deepened. On one side, alchemy edged closer to science. Careful records, repeated experiments, and the study of matter itself slowly gave birth to chemistry. On the other, alchemy remained entwined with magic, mysticism, and the search for eternal life. Some believed both paths were one, that true science could not exist without spirit, that matter and soul were reflections of each other. The greatest example of this was Isaac Newton. To the world, Newton is remembered as the father of modern physics, the man who revealed the laws of gravity and motion. But hidden within his papers, discovered long after his death, are thousands of pages on alchemy. He studied cryptic manuscripts, copied recipes for the philosopher's stone, and filled his notebooks with coded symbols. Newton, the scientist, was also Newton the alchemist. He believed that within alchemy lay the key to unlocking the very structure of the universe. His discoveries in physics and mathematics may have been fueled, in part, by his obsession with the great work. Think about that for a moment. The man who gave us the foundation of science also believed in the philosopher's stone. He searched for it in secret, fearing ridicule, but unable to resist the pull of its promise. If Newton could be drawn into the labyrinth of alchemy, how powerful must its allure truly be? And yet, alchemy was not only a European pursuit. Across the world, in China, Taoist alchemists were searching for the elixir of immortality. They mixed herbs, minerals, and metals, creating potions that sometimes healed and sometimes poisoned. Their pursuit was not gold, but eternal life, the dream of transcending mortality. Some emperors swallowed these elixirs, desperate to live forever, only to die from the very substance that promised salvation. But the idea never faded. In India, alchemy known as Rasayana promised rejuvenation and transformation. In the Middle East, the great scholar Jabir ibn Hayyan laid the groundwork for chemistry while wrapped in the mysteries of alchemy. The quest was global, universal, the human dream to escape limits, to break chains, to rise beyond death. But with every promise came danger. The fumes of mercury poisoned countless alchemists. The obsession consumed lives, driving men to madness, poverty, or death. Some vanished into obscurity, their names forgotten. Others became legends, their stories told and retold until myth overshadowed fact. What survived was not always their discoveries, but their mysteries. Imagine a small, dark room in the 16th century. The shelves lined with jars of strange powders, the table cluttered with glass vessels glowing faintly in firelight. The alchemist leans over his work, sweat dripping from his brow, his hands trembling as he pours liquid silver into a crucible. The air is thick with smoke and the sharp sting of acid. He whispers prayers, invocations, words meant to steady the fragile process. He believes that in this moment he stands at the edge of creation, that one more turn of the wheel will unlock eternity. But then a crack, a hiss, an explosion. The vessel shatters, the room fills with fumes, the dream collapses into ash. This scene repeated itself thousands of times across centuries. Failure upon failure, yet never enough to end the pursuit. Because each failure whispered a promise. Next time, perhaps. Next time, the stone might appear. And perhaps it did. Perhaps someone, somewhere, succeeded and never revealed it. What if Flamel's empty tomb was not a legend, but a clue? What if Newton discovered more than he dared to publish? What if the Rosicrucians still guard their secret libraries, waiting for the right moment to unveil the stone to a world on the brink of destruction? These are not just questions of history, they are questions of possibility, because alchemy has never truly died. Its symbols still appear in secret societies, in hidden manuscripts, in the corners of science and philosophy. Some modern researchers claim that alchemy was always about consciousness, that the transformation of lead into gold was a metaphor for transforming the human mind. And if that is true, then perhaps the stone is not a substance at all but a state of awakening that could still be achieved today. So the story of alchemy continues, stretching from ancient temples to modern laboratories, from secret chambers to open debates. It lives in whispers, in symbols, in the unquenchable human desire to rise above the ordinary. Whether it is science, magic, or myth, it remains the greatest riddle of all. And as long as humanity dreams of immortality, as long as we long to turn our suffering into something pure, the flame of alchemy will never die. The centuries wore on, and alchemy began to lose its place in the courts of kings. The scientific revolution demanded clarity, proof, and repetition, things alchemy had never been willing to give openly. Men like Robert Boyle, Antoine Lavoisier, and others began stripping the mystical language away, building a foundation of chemistry that dealt with weights, measures, and reactions instead of dragons, suns, and moons. The world shifted from secrets whispered in symbols to facts written in plain text. Yet the alchemical spirit did not vanish. It sank deeper, hiding beneath the surface of culture, faith, and philosophy. What the scientists cast aside as fantasy, others treasured as mystery. In dimly lit libraries and private collections, manuscripts remained untouched, their cryptic drawings waiting for eyes that could decode them. And in secret societies, Alchemical symbols continued to appear, not as chemical formulas, but as keys to transformation of the self. One of the most intriguing figures of this hidden survival was Elias Ashmole, an English antiquarian and one of the first members of the Royal Society. He collected alchemical texts obsessively, preserving works that might otherwise have been lost. His interest was not just scholarly, he believed deeply that alchemy held truths yet to be revealed. He passed these texts into the hands of Freemasons and other secret groups, weaving alchemy into the fabric of esoteric traditions that still survive. Meanwhile, across Europe, the Rosicrucians continued to inspire fear and fascination. Their manifestos, published in the early 1600s, claimed that a brotherhood of enlightened men held ancient knowledge capable of healing humanity and transforming civilization. They spoke of hidden libraries, of masters of wisdom guiding history from the shadows. To their followers, they were saviors. To their enemies, they were heretics and liars. Some said the Rosicrucians were merely a myth, a literary trick. Others swore they were real, moving silently through society. Their symbols, rich with alchemical meaning, appeared on buildings, manuscripts, and tombstones, always hinting, never explaining. And yet, even as these secretive movements grew, alchemy's reputation in the wider world faded into ridicule. By the 18th century, to call someone an alchemist was to call them a fraud or a fool. But beneath the mockery, the flame still burned. The dream of the philosopher's stone was too powerful to be extinguished. Whispers grew louder in the 19th century, when the occult revival swept through Europe. Men like Eliphas Levi and groups like the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn resurrected alchemy, mixing it with Kabbalah, tarot, astrology, and ritual magic. To them, the ancient symbols were not nonsense, but maps of consciousness. The sun and moon were the conscious and unconscious minds. The union of opposites was the balancing of inner forces. The stone was the perfected soul, the human being awakened to divine reality. Their ceremonies were filled with the imagery of alchemy crucibles, flasks, flames not to make gold, but to turn themselves into something greater. And while the mystics kept the symbols alive, scientists made discoveries that in their own way echoed alchemy. The elements, once thought to be four: earth, air, fire, water, were revealed to be many, each with its own weight and identity. The transmutation of matter, once laughed at as impossible, became real in the 20th century with the discovery of nuclear reactions. Lead could, in fact, be turned into gold, though the cost of energy made it impractical. In a strange way, the alchemist's dream was fulfilled, not by fire in crucibles, but by the fire of the atom. But if science had answered the material question, the spiritual question remained. What did it mean to perfect the soul? What did it mean to achieve immortality? Philosophers, psychologists, and mystics all turned back to alchemy for answers. Carl Jung, the great Swiss psychologist, devoted much of his life to studying alchemical texts. He argued that the bizarre symbols of alchemy were not nonsense, they were expressions of the unconscious mind. The alchemists, he said, were projecting their inner transformations onto their laboratories. The great work was not about metals at all, but about the human psyche. To dissolve, to coagulate, to purify, these were processes of the soul. The philosopher's stone was wholeness, the union of the conscious and unconscious, the self realized fully. In Jung's vision, every person is an alchemist, whether they know it or not. Our struggles, our failures, our suffering, these are the fires of calcination, burning away illusions. Our dreams, our visions, Our discoveries, these are the distillations and sublimations, rising upward, clarifying the essence of who we are. To live is to perform the great work. To awaken is to find the stone. And yet, legends persist of those who may have achieved more than metaphor. Across the centuries, stories surface of men and women who seemed untouched by time. The Count of Saint Germain, for example, appeared in European courts in the 18th century, dazzling nobles with his knowledge of history, art, music, and science. He claimed to have lived for centuries. Witnesses swore he never aged. He vanished, only to be reported again decades later, unchanged. Was he an immortal, an alchemist, who had found the elixir of life? Or was he a clever trickster who cultivated the perfect legend? To this day, his name is spoken with both wonder and suspicion. Other whispers tell of secret lodges in the mountains, of hidden libraries in the east, of masters who walk unseen among us, guarding the secrets of transformation. Some say they will reveal themselves when humanity is ready, when we can use the stone not for greed but for wisdom. Until then, they remain hidden, their knowledge encoded in symbols and myths. But here lies the deepest question. What if the alchemists truly did succeed? What if the stone was created, not as a glittering jewel or a shining powder, but as a state of energy, a vibration, a key to unlock hidden layers of reality? What if those who found it stepped out of history, walking in realms beyond our sight, watching us as we stumble toward the same discovery? And if that is true, then what does it mean for us now? Because humanity, in its own way, is still chasing the dream of alchemy. Our scientists seek to conquer aging through genetics and biotechnology. Our physicists unravel the fabric of matter, seeking the ultimate building blocks. Our philosophers search for meaning in chaos. Our mystics meditate, fast, and pray, hoping to dissolve the illusions of the self and awaken to something eternal. We are all alchemists, whether in the lab, the library, or the temple. The great work continues, hidden within every human effort to transcend the ordinary. The story of alchemy, then, is not a closed chapter of history. It is the mirror of humanity's eternal hunger. It tells us that within lead there is gold, within darkness there is light, within death there is life. It whispers that what we are is not what we must remain. It dares us to believe that transformation is possible, not only of metals but of souls, not only of the world but of ourselves. And perhaps, in the end, this is the greatest secret of the alchemists, that the stone is not given, it is made, not discovered, but created, and the crucible in which it is formed is not glass or fire, it is the human heart. So when you hear the old legends, when you see the strange symbols carved in stone or hidden in books, remember this: they are not dead relics, they are living maps. They point inward, urging you to begin your own great work, to burn away what is false, to distill what is true, to coagulate what is eternal, to transform yourself until you shine like gold. And who knows, perhaps one day, in a quiet moment, when the fire burns steady and the smoke clears, you may glimpse it, the stone, not in your hand, but in your soul. And in that moment, you will understand what the alchemists risked everything to find. The work is endless. The mystery remains. But the path is open, waiting for those who dare to walk it. The rain had not stopped for days, and the French countryside smelled of wet earth, smoke, and blood. He was just a soldier, one among thousands, yet in his heart, he knew he was living through something that would be remembered for centuries. He was no knight in shining armor, no lord with banners fluttering behind him, just a common man, carrying a spear, shield, and the weight of a war that seemed to have no end. He could just as easily have been French, for both sides bled the same way. His story began long before he had even picked up a weapon. He remembered as a boy hearing whispers in the village of the claim of King Edward III of England to the French throne. They spoke of pride, of rights, of dynasties stretching back generations. None of it meant anything to him then. When his own time came, he was barely 17. The levy came to the village, names were taken, and suddenly he was given a spear and told he was a soldier of England. The first march across the Channel was a nightmare. The ships were overcrowded, the sea rough. Men prayed, cursed, and clutched charms for protection. When they finally landed, the French coast looked no different than the shores of home, yet it felt foreign, hostile. They burned villages as they moved inland, orders from commanders who wanted to weaken the French. He still saw the faces of peasants fleeing their homes, carrying children and whatever they could grab. Some resisted and were cut down. He told himself it was war, that it was necessary, but the cries haunted him even then. The first real battle was that he had heard the knights boasting about how the English would humble the French chivalry, but as a common soldier, he felt only terror. The French cavalry came in waves, their armor gleaming, their banners bright, but the English longbowmen unleashed a storm of arrows that darkened the sky. Knights fell, trampled by their own men. All around him was shouting, clashing, dying. By the end of it, the field was covered with corpses, and the English stood victorious. Yet he felt no triumph, only exhaustion and the hollow ache of survival. Years passed, battles came and went. The names blurred together, Poitiers, Agincourt, sieges at Calais, Rouen, for the soldier. They were not chapters of glory, but endless cycles of hunger and blood. The war dragged on, kings died, new kings rose, yet the soldiers remained the same. He fought for Edward, then for the Black Prince, then for Henry V. To him, the crowns changed little. At Agincourt, the mud was worse than anything he had ever seen. It swallowed men whole, knights sinking under the weight of their armor, unable to rise as arrows rained upon them. The English were outnumbered, exhausted from marching, yet somehow they prevailed. He stood in the press of men, hacking, thrusting, stumbling over bodies. The cries of St. George rang in his ears, but all he thought of was staying alive one moment longer. He wondered if the kings who demanded this war ever walked among the dead after battle, breathing in the stench of rot, seeing the broken faces of men who once laughed and sang. But it was not only the French who fell. His comrades died too, some struck down in battle, others wasting away from disease, dysentery, fever, plague. They claimed more men than swords did. Rats grew fat in the camps, feeding on scraps and corpses, and some men whispered that even they were eaten. He learned quickly that war was not banners and honor. It was cold nights, empty bellies, and the constant stench of death. And yet, even in that darkness, there were moments of strange humanity. After a tense moment, the Frenchman reached into his pouch and tossed him a crust of bread. He caught it, and in return, he threw over a strip of dried meat. They nodded to each other and walked away. The next day, they might have tried to kill one another. He thought often of home, of the fields where he had once run barefoot, of his mother's voice calling him at dusk. The war drained not only the soldiers, but the villages that fed them. He wondered sometimes if the kings realized how much their claims to thrones cost the people who never sat on them. The French spoke of a young peasant girl who claimed to hear voices from heaven, guiding her to drive the English out. She rode with a banner, not a sword, her presence igniting the French with hope. He watched her from across the field as the French surged with newfound courage, and he felt the tide of the war shift. Slaughter and had sent her to end it. When Joan was captured and burned, he did not cheer, as some did. He could not say, but he knew that after her, the war was no longer the same. The French rallied, and slowly the English grip weakened. The dream of an English crown in France faded into ashes. And so, after decades, the soldier found himself older, weary, his hair streaked with gray, his hands scarred and calloused. He had fought for nearly his whole life, from boyhood to manhood to age, and what had it given him? A few coins, memories of battles, and the faces of friends buried in foreign soil. He realized then that the 100 Years' War was not truly about kings or crowns. It was about the men like him who had carried the weight, who had bled, who had died. Their names would not be written in chronicles, their stories not sung by bards, yet it was they who had lived the true tale. And as he sat by the dying fire one night, listening to the wind whistle through the broken tents, he whispered to himself that if ever people remembered this war, they should remember not only the kings and victories, but the soldier's tale, the tale of a man who marched through mud, hunger, and fire, who gave his youth and strength to a cause he barely understood, and who survived, though he could never say why. The war did not end with a sudden silence, but with a slow fading, like embers dimming after a fire that had burned too long. For the soldier, it was not a moment of triumph, but a gradual realization that the armies were smaller, the marches shorter, the commands less frequent. There was no peace treaty handed to him, no king shaking hands across a battlefield. One day he was fighting, and the next he was told to go home, though he was no longer certain where home truly was. He had given his youth to the cause of kings, and now stood in a land scarred by generations of war, with little to his name but scars and memories. He wandered back toward England, passing through villages ruined beyond recognition. Roofless cottages sagged like broken teeth. Fields once golden with wheat lay abandoned, overgrown with weeds, and the roads were haunted by beggars and orphans. He saw mothers clutching children with hollow eyes, men with missing limbs begging at crossroads, and graves marked only by rough stones or not marked at all. This was the legacy of 100 years, not glory, but emptiness. Crossing the Channel again, he expected some comfort in the sight of his homeland, but England to bore the wounds of war. Taxes had drained the countryside, famine had thinned the villages, and the plague had stolen countless lives. He recognized the shape of the hills, the bend of rivers, yet the faces were strangers. His own village, when he finally reached it, was changed beyond recognition. His mother was long gone, his father buried in a grave he could not find, his childhood home occupied by another family who looked at him with suspicion when he approached. He did not blame them. Too many displaced men wandered now, some thieves, some deserters, some simply lost like him. He turned away without a word, realizing he was a ghost haunting the land of the living. For a time he drifted. He sold his labor where he could, carrying wood, plowing fields, repairing thatched roofs. But always he carried himself like a soldier, shoulders straight, eyes watchful, hands rough from years gripping spear and sword. Children stared at him in silence, sensing the shadow that clung to him. At night, when he tried to sleep, he dreamed of battles, of arrows falling like rain, of horses screaming, of mud swallowing men whole. He woke with a start, heart pounding, the smell of smoke still in his nostrils. The war was over, yet it lived inside him, refusing to let him go. He met others like himself, old campaigners who had survived the endless marches. Some were drunkards now, drowning memory in ale. Others told stories in taverns, boasting of Agincourt or Poitiers, as though they had been heroes, though their eyes betrayed the hollowness beneath their words. A few bore wounds too deep to hide, missing eyes or limbs, their lives reduced to begging. They laughed together at times, trading tales of commanders and miseries. But the laughter always ended in silence, as if they all knew the truth. Nothing could erase what they had seen. Years passed, and the soldier found work as a guard in a small town. It was not glory, but it gave him food and a roof. He patrolled the market square, breaking up fights between drunkards, chasing thieves, standing watch at the gate. The townsfolk came to know him as a stern but fair figure, a man who asked little and spoke less. Children whispered rumors that he had once fought giants in France, that he had killed 100 men. He let them believe what they wished, though he knew the truth was far less noble. He had killed, yes, but mostly strangers whose names he never learned, and each one left a mark he could not erase. One winter evening, as he sat by the fire, a young boy approached him, no older than he had been when the levy had taken him from his village. The boy's eyes were wide with curiosity, and he asked, what was it like to fight in the Great War? The soldier stared into the flames for a long time before answering. He could have told tales of banners and trumpets, of kings leading charges, of victories that bards sang about. But instead, he said, it was cold, it was hunger, it was watching friends die and wondering why you still lived. The boy frowned, disappointed, and left, perhaps thinking the old man had grown bitter with age. But the soldier knew he had spoken the truest words he had ever said. The memory of Joan of Arc lingered in him most of all. He had seen many leaders, many commanders, but none like her. There had been something unshakable in her gaze, something that made even hardened soldiers pause. He thought of her often, not as an enemy, but as a symbol of what the war had done to them, all how it had taken peasants, farmers, children, and turned them into weapons for crowns and thrones. She had burned, but her fire had outlived her, changing the course of the war. In his heart, he wondered if perhaps she had been the only one who truly understood what the war was meant to end. As age crept upon him, the soldier felt the weight of his years more keenly. His hands ached, his legs stiffened, and the scars across his body pulled tight in the cold. Yet still, he could not escape the war. Sometimes, in the marketplace, he would hear a song sung by traveling minstrels, praising Henry V, or mocking the French defeat. People clapped and cheered, but he turned away, feeling sick. The songs told nothing of the mud, the disease, the hunger. They turned suffering into entertainment, as if war were a tale for amusement. He wished, just once, that someone would sing of the nameless soldiers, of the men who had given everything and received nothing. On his last journey, he traveled once more across the Channel, not as a soldier, but as a pilgrim. He wanted to see the fields where he had once fought, to stand among the graves of the countless dead. At He found only open fields, the grass green and swaying in the wind. At Agincourt, he walked across the soil where so many had fallen, now just farmland where peasants worked in silence. The land had forgotten the blood that once stained it, yet he remembered every step. He knelt, pressing his hand to the earth, and whispered the names of the few comrades he still carried in memory. There was no monument for them, no stone carved with their sacrifices, only his voice, carried away by the wind. As he grew older still, he began to write, though he had never been taught much more than his letters. He scratched on parchment, slowly, painfully, telling his tale as best he could. He did not write of kings or treaties, but of soldiers, of the march, of hunger, of fleeting moments of kindness. He wrote of the boy who gave him bread, of the friend who died of fever, of the fear in his own heart when arrows fell. Perhaps no one would ever read his words. Perhaps they would be lost like so many others. But he hoped that one day someone might understand that the 100 years, war was not only a struggle of crowns, but of countless men who lived and died unseen. When the end finally came for him, it was not on a battlefield, but in a quiet bed, the fire burning low. He closed his eyes and saw again the fields of France, the banners snapping in the wind, the faces of comrades who had long since gone. He did not see kings or thrones, only soldiers like himself. And in his last breath, he thought that perhaps his tale, the tale of a common man, was as important as any crown. For it was in such lives that the true cost of war was written. And so his story ends, not with trumpets or victory, but with silence. The 100 Years' War faded into history, its causes debated, its battles remembered, its kings immortalized. But the soldier's tale remained, carried not in chronicles, but in the memory of the land itself, in the scars etched into the soil, in the whispers of those who lived through it. For wars are not made by crowns alone, but by the countless men who march and bleed in their shadow. And though their names may be forgotten, their story endures in every life touched by the fire of battle.